with offers, I had a guy I worked with, I took him from 100K a month to 3 million a month.
Essentially, what I'm getting from you is you don't necessarily need somebody that's just going to get you a couple of steps ahead. You should have the will in order to get yourself that couple of steps ahead, because the resources and the information are all out there if you want them, right? You don't need somebody to handhold you. And that obviously, when you're building a team, that's actually another quality, is obviously making sure that somebody doesn't need to be handheld across things, that they can be a self-starter.
Like you pay amateurs to figure it out and you pay professionals to do it, right? That's the biggest difference, right? So it's like you pay amateurs to figure it out and you pay professionals to do the job, right? That's it. And so it'll cost you a lot more to figure it out than to do the job, even though it might cost more upfront. That's one thing I learned the hard way.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, you have to pay for skills, right? To get the right people, you got to compensate them. So,
well, it should be free, to be honest with you. Like my whole philosophy of marketing is like to compete on economics, right? So it's like, if you really like, there's 3 levels of economics. You got the front end offer economics, and you got the secret economics, and you got the hidden economics, right? So secret economics is like doing deals in the back to offset the burden of delivery for a good amount of money. And then hidden economics is basically like allocating capital, right? So if you really think about what business is, it's nothing than like acquisition of capital, allocation of capital, multiplication of capital, right? That's it. So it's like, if you offers acquire capital, you sit there and you're like, okay, well, who do I give this capital to? You allocate capital and then you multiply capital. If you really think about what Elon Musk does, what Buffett does, what all the super rich, they have a system that acquires capital, offers some type of thing, right? And then they sit there and they have good management. And what good management does is allocate capital and then make sure that allocation gets implemented to create multiplication of capital, right? With offers, I had a guy I worked with, I took him from 100K a month to 3 million a month. The question then is like, well, how do we pay for this, right? It's like, how do you pay for the team, right? Because it's like, it's not fun, like, taking on like 7 to 10 grand a month, bunch of people, so the next thing we get like 100 grand a month, whatever, et cetera, right? Then it was easy. It was just like, well, just create the back end, and each one of those back end sales covers the front end. And if these people get you a lot of money. So it's like, it's very easy if you really think about it. The other thing is like, when it comes to offers and everything, there's this sense of, we tend to look up to really, people that are kind of like giants, right? It's very intimidating, but like, we don't really celebrate the smaller heroes, right? Big starts small, right? And so it's like, every offer that makes $1 million a month at one point made, 100K a month, and at one point made 10K a month or $1,000 a month, whatever, right?
It's interesting that you say, you just kind of casually mentioned you took somebody from $1 million to 3 million. First of all, how long was that? And what was the key driver of getting him or him or her to get from 100,000 to 3 million?
Yeah. So this person spent like 2 years in a very high-end copywriting mastermind. And like, so they tried a lot of copy tricks to make it work. And it was just like, again, copy is really important, and everybody watching this should learn it. Like, you should strive to master it. But you also have to realize it's that words have a limitation to the degree that the other person can absorb. So it's like, communication isn't really about what you say, it's what the other person hears. And the way people filter information, hear information, is far important than how you say things, right? That's what affects the thing. So he came to me, and basically it was, they tried the same thing, which was like, do a webinar, do this, right? And so it's like, one thing I learned years ago, 2014, whatever, it's like I mastered copy, right? I mastered copy. And it was like, what I found was like, with copy, people I were competing with, we talked about the FTC earlier. It's like, you get to a stage of a market where claims start to get crazy, right? The way it works, like, you make some money, whatever, and then you buy a lot of stuff, and then you like having nice stuff, and, you get in debt. And then it's like, you got to make a choice. Do you want to keep this stuff, or, do you want to keep the business, right? And so it's like, one of the biggest lessons I learned out of this book is like the concept about acting big, thinking small, acting big. So a lot of times when people make some decent money, they start acting big and thinking small. So when you don't have a lot of money, you think big, but you act small, right? Even me right now, like, I don't buy anything, right? Like, I can afford pretty much anything I can imagine, but I really don't buy anything. Like, I know how to create desire. I hit the level where it's like, I know, like, most people in this industry are like, well, you can't create desire. I'm like, there's a way to create desire. So I know how desire works on a deep level. And so it's like, I know how marketing affects me. And so it's like, I'm kind of like becoming immune to it, right?
You're immune. Yeah, you're immune to any sales pitch.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is like in 2014, like, and then at the time, like, I'm looking around and I'm like, man, it's like, you had a choice to make. Like, it's like, do you, the only way to compete with liars in copy is to become a bigger liar. That's it. And that's what everybody, like, if you look at, sophistication models, that's what happens. And at the end, the government stops to regulate, right? I was like, I don't want to compete with liars. Like, I'm done. So I went into the software world, right? But before that, like, we were like running offers, and, we were thinking we're like hot shit with copy. And there's guys doing like $800,000 a day, right? Like on Google. And I'm like, fuck. And they have no copy. It's like just some dinky ass 2-page website, whatever. I'm like, what the fuck, right? And it's like, for a long time, for like good, like 4 to 6 months, like I had a buddy of mine, and like, he's like, dude, it's like, we're promoting this thing, and it's like, this thing is like making this much money, and it's converting at this like 10, 15, 20%. And like, we're getting like 3% with BSLs and, sales letters. And like, oh man, my brain fought that. Like, it wouldn't accept it. Right. Cause I had to literally destroy everything I knew. So I was like, okay, fuck it, right? Let me look at it. So I started studying it, what people were doing. And what I realized largely is like, it's all about competing on economics, right? What I mean by, most people compete on words. And like, for example, like, I can write a letter, you can write a letter or VSL, whatever, and we're selling the same thing. And, if we're selling the same thing, we can twist the words, emotions, whatever. You can increase it, right? But it's like to increase it by like a factor of 5 to 10, you're not going to do it, right? I'll give you an example. So for example, I can go to the top 10 copywriters in the world and you say, hey guys, here, beat this controller. So what's happening is like, so you can have 5 copywriters, compete and they're like, 5% better, 10%, whatever, right? So I don't look at conversion rates. I look at AOV contribution rates, right? Because at the end of the day, Google operates on money. They want basically how much money can you spend, or at Facebook, they're not awarding ad placements based on conversion rates, right? So for example, there was a famous copywriter going around a few years ago saying something like, for every percentage I increase your conversion rate, you got to give me $1,000. I'm like, sure, just lower the fucking price. Done, right? It's not hard. And so it's like, I don't look at the conversion rates, which is a very flawed thing, conversion rate of what? Because the conversion rate has to represent something. So I look at AOV contributions when I'm optimizing a funnel, right? So when you have a whole funnel path. Anyway, so I started thinking about this and I was like, okay, words are limited. The reason words are limited is because understanding is limited, right? And so understanding is limited because you can say something, I can say something, and it doesn't matter what we say, it's how they hear us, right? So that's why there's a great book everybody should read. This one right here, it's called Art of Readable Writing by Rudolf Flesch, right? So there's this concept called, like, I call them cheap words and expensive words, but he basically, like, Latin words are expensive words, Anglo-Saxon words are cheap words. So there's a whole strategy on how to write. So the cheaper words, they use them easily, they're understood. So it's not really matter, so comprehension is low. And what I mean by comprehension is like, what do people understand? Because like the way it works is like when you write stuff, images are formed in the mind, and those images are linked to memories, and then memories, feelings and emotions come out, right? That's the structure of it. After realizing that, I was like, what the hell? What do we got to do here? And so I realized that it's like the key is to compete on economics, like numbers, right? Change the numbers.
Yeah.
So economics, but competing on economics goes much, much deeper. And so I'm writing this new book, and like everything, like in the NHB platform that I'm building, it's based on this. But to compete on economics is basically like to compete on trade-offs. And so if you look at what economics means, it basically means that to allocate scarce resources, right? So remember, acquisition of capital, allocation of capital, multiplication of capital, it's the same thing. It's like, but on like a personal level, like, so it's like they acquire resources and they allocate resources, right? Yeah. So money. So they acquire money through work, time, whatever. Most people have time, business, whatever. Then it's like, how do they allocate that money? So one of the things that most people get wrong when it comes to selling and marketing is that they come with this premise that it's like they just want to get a yes, right? So I do a lot of things differently. Like, well, shit, most of the thing I do is completely like, it's not what everybody else thinks, a completely different way of thinking, but that's why I get the best results for people. And by the way, I'm getting to that point how I got the results for the guy, right? This is like a lesson in itself. It's really important. So when it comes to economics, it's like, what's the trade-off, right? Like what's the trade-off? So for every time you get somebody to say yes to giving you money, simultaneously you're getting them to say no to a whole lot of things, right? So for example, if I ask you to give me $1,000 for something, I'm asking you not to buy, maybe a new phone, maybe an Apple Watch, maybe, a thing for your son, maybe a thing for your mother. I'm asking you not to buy that TV. I'm asking you a lot of other things. But the thing is, like, I don't know what I'm asking you, right? I don't know what I'm asking you. And so the key is, like, when it comes to sale, is to get the no first before you can say the yes. Then the yes becomes a lot easier, right? And so if you look at every single funnel, it's nothing more than just like a series of decisions, right? That's it. A funnel is a series of decisions. However, when you have a lot of decisions, then you accumulate decision fatigue. So decision fatigue is accumulated by the fact that they have to compute trade-offs, right? They have to think about it, right? And that's why if you look at the upsell path, it always goes like this, because they get tired of making do I want this? Do I want that? Do I want that? What, et cetera, right? So the basis of making an irresistible offer, I shared this in a group, is like, would you trade anything in the world for this, right? How to make them? And the answer is yes, to trade, right? That's kind of the idea, right? And how do people trade this for that, to that, to that, to that, right? And so this goes really deep. There's like, it's like a lot of depth to it, right? So that's one thing. And then put that aside. And then there was this other thing where if you look at, as far as like economics, you have economics of attention, right? Yeah. And so in today's world, what's happening is we love to buy, but people love to buy because it feels really good to buy, right? Like it's a good feeling, right? Because we can choose what makes us feel good, but we hate being sold to, because that implies that we don't get to choose what makes us feel good, right? Yeah. And so in today's world, sales processes, this is what I talked about earlier, it's like all processes stop working, because when people realize, because people like, so the one of the fundamental tenets of direct response and conversions is that you have to be in control of the sales process. So when I have like, famous YouTubers or you TikTokers or influencers, whatever, come to me, the first question I ask them is, your sales like this? Like, like a steady sale, like, you ever seen like medical charts? It's like, or is it like beep, like that, right? And if they're like this, I'm like, you're not in control of the sales process, because you can see on these peaks, they're deciding when they want to buy. So you got to have a steady thing where money always comes in. That's how you know you control the sales process, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can be in control of the sales process if they know what the sales process is. So you always have to hide the sales process. So if you look at the history of direct response, and this is why you should study supertext, is because back in the day, like with John E. Kennedy, they looked at newspapers and they were like, oh, this is shit. What if, simple question, what if we made our advertisement look like an article? Would more people read it? Yes. And so they did it, and a lot of people read it. Then Gary Halbert was, rest in peace, was like, well, if we make a letter, sales letter, look like a letter, if you look at the coat of arms letter, it's like Dear Nancy or whatever, right? It's a letter. It's not a sales letter, right? If you look at an infomercial, it's not a infomercial. It's a TV commercial late at night. If you look at webinars, they're not webinars. So you always have some type of innovation that hides the sales process. So the first is hiding the sales process, right? The secondary thing is that you have to look at innovation in marketing. So where innovation in marketing comes from is basically this idea of it's some type of technology that enables us to communicate, right? So if you look at, like, as humans have a need for information that gives us safety and security. So we're always like scanning the environment for information. And that's why we have novelty in the brain, because novelty of information, novelty of data, survival, right? And so that's why TikTok is addictive, because it could just more data, amongst other things. And so what we do largely is that we, you pay attention to something new that emerges, right? Such as a podcast, right? And you pay attention to what are people paying attention to, right? So in that particular thing, we took from webinars and we say, well, what if we just package that into a thing that looks like a podcast? Let's create a new format, right? So we did it, and then it's crushing it. So right now, as I'm recording this, I have a client in Italy. His name is Alex, great guy, right? He's using all the stuff I'm telling you this, and like all the stuff I thought in Fast Forward. He's literally spending $1,000 a day, euros, and making 15,000 back a day on the front end. No coaching, nothing in the finance space, by the way, finance space, right? 15x. It's insane. So that's what it looks like, right? They're not aware of the sales process. You basically process, and basically then they absorb the sales process, right? So if you can get them to absorb the sales process, you can increase it, right? And I'm the master at that. And so there's nobody better than me in the world at that. So what ends up happening is, like, when you hide the sales process, then you can download that data info, and you can do all sorts of other things once you get in the mind, like change thoughts and beliefs, and and change pull emotions, move things around, but you got to get in there first, right? And to get in there, so that's what we did with that guy. We basically changed the sales process. We look at this new thing. I looked at his audience, and I said, shit, man, well, these guys, we'll spend 3 hours watching Joe Rogan. Let's just make something looked at. And then they were like, okay, but there was a nuance, which is basically like this idea of big idea copy and mechanistic copy, right? And so I've talked shit about this, and I will continue to talk shit about it forever. And I've had famous marketers try to challenge me on it, and they're like, well, big idea is great, and I'm like, well, how the fuck is it great if you have to spend 2 weeks finding out why the product is good? I don't need 2 weeks to tell you why this is good. It's like this: if something isn't good, the product itself. So we go back to the beginning of the call, which is transformative value, right? Something that transforms. If the product is transformative, we don't need a big idea to demonstrate that. It just works. So people buy for the product, right? So a product can exist and sell without marketing. Marketing cannot exist without product. Marketing without good product is called a scam, right? That's it. That's why people complain to the FTC and stuff, because it's like marketing, again, the beginning, what's the formula for creating a brand? Experience exceeding expectation, right? So if the marketing goes and promises stuff, basically what ends up happening is that the expectation exceeds experience. You have complaints, right? That's it.
I'm obviously curious to hear how, like, beating the control and how you do it, because that was one thing that you mentioned that I wanted to get on there. But, I'm obviously, these are very, high level kind of marketing techniques and things that I feel like, obviously you have to have some experience. Somebody was already making $100,000 before you got them to 3 million, right? Like they already knew how to make the 100K, which is a lot further than most people. But in order to get to the point that you need that, there has to be, I guess, numbers, like you were saying, right? It's like you can have 2 great sales letters, you can have 2 great products. Like there's a lot of people who come to Direct PayNet for different various reasons, but they could also go to my competitor, even though I think I'm better. You know what I mean? But it's relaying the message out there. So it does take some math, right? Like when I say math, it's metrics. Like how do you have to also learn how do you get the traffic? How do you get the eyeballs? Because you can have the greatest offer in the world. If you have no eyeballs on it, doesn't matter, right? So that was one thing that you touched upon, is that, like you have a lot of sales letter, what makes one successful. There's obviously a lot of strategy behind it, but on the, just kind of surface, on the math side of things, or I call it the math side, but meaning the getting people's eyeballs, getting them to on the page, getting them to fill out the order page. How do you, as Google and Facebook and all the big techs are changing their algorithms, how do you compete on that? How do you do it?
Yeah. So like, I mean, like if you're a copywriter, you have a massive head start. But if you're also a media buyer, you have like, I honestly like the best people I've seen to become offer owners are media buyers. There's so far not one media buyer I haven't really worked with or mentored that didn't go to make, millions of dollars. You have to realize first off that it's like the whole world is conspiring to make you money, right? That's kind of like my belief.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So,
I like that.
So for example, like, like Google has like, I don't know how many employees they have, like, 100,000 or something, right? Facebook has like, let's say 100,000 too. And it's like, you have all these people like whose entire job is to like, make sure that you can access audiences, right? How crazy is that? Like, so for example, like, Google is worth trillions of dollars, not trillion, I think it's maybe like a trillion or whatever. And Facebook was worth a trillion, still worth a lot. They're worth a lot of money because people can actually monetize that traffic. So it's like, we don't have a lack of traffic. We have a lack of monetized traffic, right? So traffic is everywhere. Like the whole internet is like nothing but traffic, right? Like that's it. So it's like, there's all this like potential hopping around that's hopping around with desires, et cetera, and all this stuff. That's like in emotion. So if you know how to like tap into that, which is basically like markets, like, what are markets? And so it's like, I think one of the biggest challenges that people make with making offers is they think offer first when you should think, industry market first, right? So I said in the beginning of the call, it's like, you don't optimize an offer, you adapt it to the market, right? And the reason is like a market will control the offer, control the offer. So case in point, like you can have a really great offer in a bad market, and it's like, it'll be really difficult to make it work, right? When you have a really bad offer in a great market, it'll be easy to make it work, right? So that's how it works. It's almost like where you bet is where you make money, right? And so when it comes to markets, there's like static markets and there's dynamic markets, right? And there's mechanical and creative, right? So I talked about this like a year and a half ago in the Facebook group, but this is one of the biggest things that mess people up, right? And so if you have like a dynamic market, like internet marketing, teaching internet marketing, that's a dynamic market, right? And so what I mean by that is that it's hard to build a stable business where everything changes, right? So for example, like imagine you open a McDonald's and people don't like burgers next week. It's like, well, shit, what do you make? You got to go, that's it. And so for example, in internet marketing, right, there's not one offer that has lasted more than 5 years.
I think usually they fizzle out in 18 months. Then might
right, exactly. And this
cycle's getting smaller.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, so you got that, and then you got static market, right? And so like in the mastermind around like Fast Forward and Imagery Plus, like we teach also like, like astrology market, right? So we teach people how to go into that market. And so that market is static. So like you can build an offer in a static market and run it for like 5 years, whatever. I have a friend, like he's in the female dating space, and he's literally been running the same ads for like 10 years now, like 10 years.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, on Google, right? And so then you have like mechanical markets and creative markets. So mechanical markets like follow these steps and you'll get the outcome. Creative markets are hard because it's like you have to get the end user to have creativity, right? So for example, I know a lot of people want to teach copy. So teaching copy is kind of difficult because the user has to have creativity in a dynamic market. Hard combo, but a lot of turnover, a lot of opportunity, but also difficult, right? Yeah. So it's knowing how to pick markets. Knowing how to pick markets is probably like, it's a cheat code.
It's almost like creating a customer avatar. Is that what you're saying? Like if I'm following correctly, like really knowing targeting and then figuring out if that market is actually a market that's a viable market, like somebody who's going to buy.
Yeah, markets go through changes though. Like I have this thing like where I teach, it's like the market maturity cycles. Like it's different than Eugene Schwartz cycles. So it depends where the market is in the stage will determine like if you should go into the market or not. There's different aspects to it, right? But it largely has to do with picking the market, right? And so a lot of people pick like, difficult markets or like markets are just not big enough. So like direct response by large, like if you have a VSL or a sales letter, can penetrate about 1% to 3% max of the market. Like 3% is like tough, right? So 1%. And so I've worked with people that, sold 1 million books. I've seen data over the years, like how it happens, right? And so it's like, if you have a market that's like, say 100 million people and you sell 1 million books, then it goes, it gets harder, right? So like when you look at the market, so you have to look at the market size. The market turnover, meaning how many people come in and how many people come out, is also very, very important as far as that, right? And so, it's like when you know all these things, you don't have to guess. You can just kind of like crisscross it. You know exactly what's going to happen, where you are and how it works. And that's it. Then you get into demographics like, psychological market, physiological markets. You have wants, you have needs, the trade-offs, and all these other things.